Become a Body Kindness Insider. Visit bodykindnessbook.com and click on Get Started. Because real health is about being good to yourself, it's time for Body Kindness, the place where all bodies fit and weight is just a number. Hi, I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness, registered dietitian nutritionist, and host of this podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about moderation and why, I don't know why, but why it's not as alluring or interesting or sexy in the food world as the idea of eliminate. And my special guest to discuss this today is Monica Reinagel. Monica Reinagel is a board-certified licensed nutritionist and professionally trained chef. Her advice is regularly featured on Today's Show, Dr. Oz, CBS News Morning Edition, and in the nation's leading newspapers, magazines, and websites. She's also a regular contributor to Huffington Post, Scientific American, Food and Nutrition Magazine, and MyFitnessPal, as well as a busy public speaker and educator. Monica's weekly Nutrition Diva podcast has been one of iTunes' most highly ranked health and fitness podcast since its debut in 2008. With more than 400 episodes and over 28 million downloads in 189 countries. Her nutrition blog and coaching program are found at nutritionovereasy.com. Welcome to the show, Monica. I have to say to you that your Nutrition Diva podcast was the first podcast I ever listened to.
Well, and I've been at it for an awfully long time. When I first started it, I didn't really even know what a podcast was, but I had been blogging for several years and was approached by the team at Quick and Dirty Tips about launching that nutrition podcast. It just seemed like it would be a fun thing to do. But I have to tell you, when I started, so it's a weekly podcast, as you know, and I didn't know a whole lot about podcasting when I started, but I thought, I'm going to run out of things to talk about, like maybe if I get 50 episodes in that first year, I'll pretty much have covered everything. And I don't know what else there will be to talk about. And, I just totally underestimated how much there is. There's just a constant supply of new information, new misinformation. I spend an awful lot of time talking about that, trying to kind of clear up some of the misunderstandings. And I get so many great questions and topic ideas and suggestions from listeners that here we are almost 9 years later, still turning out a podcast every week. So it's been a really fun, long run and no plans to stop anytime soon. But thank you for being one of the early listeners.
Well, it's great. And I loved your voice right away. And I remember kind of, looking you up and everything. And you have like a history as a singer, right? Is that right?
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I actually went back to graduate school to study nutrition as an adult student. My first career was in classical music. I went to college the first time around to study opera and worked as a professional opera singer for about 10 years before I made a big shift into a completely different world. But because like you, I spend a lot of time out in the public sphere and talking and presenting and podcasting. It's kind of a way to extend that performing career, but just in a different avenue. And every once in a while, I do get to sing a concert. So.
Oh, that's so cool. I just always love finding out those little nuggets, those little unique pieces of information about somebody. Like you are pretty much the only opera singer I've ever known.
I don't know. You might be surprised. We're lurking. We all have other jobs, right? Because none of us can actually make a living in opera. So I bet you know more than you think.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, no, I've always loved listening and just, you have a really compassionate approach and a level-headed approach to the responses, which I think is really important because in the world where we live, it's all about the headline and the clickbait and what kind of scary title can we give because that's going to get lots of clicks or downloads and everything like that. And you actually and kind of bringing a more realistic and sustainable and I think a helpful view on things that's really lacking, in where we get our nutrition information from. And, it just really is a great service for people. But I wanted to talk a little bit about just this whole idea of like where we're at with food and nutrition, how it has gotten to be so complicated, and just would love to know what your thoughts are on that.
That's a very interesting question. And I remember we talked a little bit about this when you were on the Nutrition Diva podcast back in January. Like, how did it get so complex? And I think that, for better or for worse, as you just mentioned, nutrition is not just a health profession. It's also an industry. And it's become a big part of the media. And so it's also kind of part of the entertainment industry. And in order to keep that live and fresh, there has to be a lot of complexity and, some controversy and the kinds of things that keep it in the headlines and that keep people, as you say, clicking. So I think, some of it may be driven by the fact that we are in the media and in the sort of public communication world, and those are some of the values that end up driving there. But I also, as a nutrition professional, although I think eating healthfully is a lot simpler than we sometimes make it out to be as people, nutrition science is, of course, it is very complex. And there's a lot of really complicated research going on that's important and necessary to increase our understanding. But too much of that, I think, ends up sort of bleeding through to the public before it's really ready for public consumption. And so there's a lot of noise, I think, information and research and which gets turned into headlines that is meaningful to nutrition researchers and medical researchers, but way too preliminary or partial to actually be useful for consumers. And so when that ends up kind of going into the same media stream as everything else, then it can kind of feel like there's just such a blizzard of information that it's hard to tune into the things that matter. So, that is definitely one of the things that I enjoy focusing on, is helping people kind of weed out what are the things that are actually worth paying attention to, what changes or habits or priorities can make the biggest difference, and what can safely be left on the sidelines, because we just can't worry about everything.
No, that's a really good point, and almost like a bit of a caution to people that there is an information overload of headlines, and just because it's a research study, just because it's in a publication or a website that looks authoritative, doesn't mean that the nerdy scientists have all done their job and have come to a consensus of this is now, there's now enough evidence that we can recommend this as something that most people can follow. And it's very, like you'll see it like, a client forwarded, are eggs really as bad for you as smoking? And it's like, it sounds so crazy to us, right? Like, why would you ever associate eating a wholesome, nutrient-rich food like eggs and cigarette smoking? But that's part of what gets the eyeballs. And, I think that's also the ugly side of trying to get attention. If you're a researcher and want funding and you want your study published, and then there, people are doing interviews, that sometimes you can get sucked into providing something that's actually not really helpful to people. And then they're all confused, emailing you to be, to answer the question on the podcast, or emailing me or something. And we just need to help people say, and I want to hear what your advice is on this next, but like, there are some simple self-care eating patterns that we do know will be helpful for health and well-being, but you're going to see a lot of other noise, like you said, elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's it. But I think another thing that gets people kind of drawn into these debates that aren't really that meaningful is this idea that there's really only one way to do this right, and only one diet or dietary approach that wins, that's better. And so we get these like eternal debates about low carb versus, other approaches. But what's underlying that is this idea that there's only one right way and that everybody needs to get on the same way. And what I've seen in my years of practice, and I imagine you've seen the same, is there are actually a lot of ways to put together a healthful diet. And that the key is finding what's going to work best for each individual person, because when it fits into your lifestyle and into your habits and your cultural traditions and the kinds of foods you like to eat and know how to cook, then that's going to be have a much better chance of being a long-term sustainable lifestyle, as opposed to, just a flash in the pan. And that's, one of the things that I feel like if I can accomplish nothing else, I really would love for us to get away from this sort of all or nothing approach to nutrition, where, you're either doing everything right or nothing at all. Because it just kind of implies that it's very difficult to eat healthy. And as you and I both know, it's not that hard. You can pick 3 or 4 kind of central habits to focus on, and a lot of the other stuff will fall into place without too much additional effort. And then if you have the energy and the time to tweak around the edges, those last few little remaining details, go for it, but too often I think it seems so overwhelming and so daunting that we don't try at all. We just figure, I'm not capable of following a healthy diet the way it seems like you would have to. So, why bother starting? And I just feel like that's such a disservice.
Yeah. No, because it's like we look for the rules of the game. Like, okay, so what are we supposed to do? And to be fair, in a lot of ways, I mean, they are presented as rules, and the do this, don't do that, and the pass fail type thing. And it plays into the human psyche, right? For, okay, so if I'm doing good if I'm doing this. But following rules is not the same as making decisions where you actually have to think about, well, wait a minute. Okay, so vegetables are good for me. Okay, what do I like? What do I like to eat? How do I like to taste them? Like, there really are choices that need to be made in order to follow through and make something a habit. I mean, otherwise you're following a plan until you're done with the plan, as opposed, exactly. As opposed to this idea that there are choices that you need to make, and sometimes sacrifices, right? It takes more time to cook for yourself and certain things that, by putting that effort in, I think people want to know, okay, well, so what's the reward of that? How is that effort going to translate into something meaningful? And so much we often bring it back to, by and large, weight loss, right? Or, preventing from getting fat. Or I also hear, like warding off disease. And so now food, it becomes like this instrument to like fight all these scary things. And I don't really think it helps a person approach eating in a calm way.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it makes it very stressful and fraught. And I love the term that you use, like pass fail. Mm-hmm. Like you either passed or you failed. And I feel like, no, it was just a meal,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You get a couple more today, and you get a few more tomorrow. And, I think that as you talk a lot in Body Kindness about sort of human nature and our programming and how these impulses have been kind of wired into our psyches. And I think you have some amazing insights on what drives some of these behaviors and attitudes about food, the tribal thing and survival elements. I think there's another aspect of human nature, which is we tend to pay a lot of attention to extremes and kind of underestimate the importance of just the kind of everyday stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we may obsess over, an indulgent meal that we had, or, a trip we took where we really, indulged a little bit. And, we say like, oh, we've ruined our diet and I'm going to have to pay for that. And, I got to make up for that. And then we do the same thing on the other end of the spectrum. We do some 3-day juice cleanse, which, I don't recommend. I know you don't recommend it, but people find those things very compelling. They do them. They stick to it for 3 days and they feel like, okay, I undid the damage. I fixed everything. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, oh, so much attention is paid on those days when we feel like we're being really bad, or that day that we were really good. And meanwhile, there's the other 300 days of the year that are actually adding up to our habits. It's the everyday habits that are determining whether our choices are supporting our health and helping us feel as good as we can and helping us get as much enjoyment out of our life and our meals as we can. So, but that's human nature. We are wired to attend to extremes and outliers and not the sort of constant, so sometimes it's a matter of helping people tune back in and think a little bit more clearly about, well, what am I really doing every day? As opposed to just that day when I was really good or really bad.
Yeah. And, I would say, there's kind of the villain changes shape, so I remember like fat was the villain when I was coming up. So if it was fat free, it was for me and, woo, eat as much as you want of the fat free stuff. And then we had low carb, and I feel like lately sugar is the big villain. And it's this idea that what I hear consistently, those are all examples of extremes and something to eliminate and push away, which also means we're pushing away pleasure and enjoyment and a part of the meaningful part of life that food is supposed to fill, like community and sharing and connection. Food has always been part of how we bond with other people. But in those headlines, those avoid, this is going to kill you type diety world that we've been living in, my guess is since before I was even born, they basically say like, well, you can't do moderation. And I've even seen that in the headlines recently. And I know in at least one of Gretchen Rubin's books, which she's very influential in the happiness and positivity space. And, she's trained as a lawyer, and she basically says, well, I don't believe people can do moderation. And so it's like you have someone who's of influence that says moderation isn't possible. Well, then that gets in people's head and they say, oh yeah, no, I definitely can't do moderation. Well, if you've been eliminating it and then you let it back in, it is hard to moderate until you actually have permission to eat it again. But I don't understand how people can think that moderation isn't possible. And so I really want to get your take on that whole scenario.
Well, moderation is definitely something that I've focused on in lots of different podcasts. And sometimes I always feel like I have to apologize before I say, okay, it's like we always say, this is really about moderation, because that seems like in your intro, you were saying that's so unsexy and so unhip to talk about. Like, really, it's fine. We just want to keep it in balance with other choices that we're making. And, all of the stuff that goes around that. Just most recently, we were talking about debates about whether things like red meat can be considered healthy or not. And or fill in the blank, there was the whole debate about, what the Kind Bar company kind of put before the
well, the FDA, yeah, somebody,
labeling.
went to the FDA to say you can't call Kind Bars healthy because a couple of bars, it was saturated fat because it had a coconut in it or something. Yeah, it was just weird.
So this whole conversation about is fill in the blank healthy? And I feel like that is the wrong question. No, we can't take any food in a vacuum and declare it healthy or unhealthy. I want to know, how much of it are you eating? How often? What are you eating it with? What are you eating? What are you not eating because you're eating that instead? I feel like we have to have all of those pieces of information before I can really say, like, yeah, that seems like a good choice given that context.
Yeah.
But, but we'd rather just have, like 10 foods that are going to put you in an early grave, or 3 foods that are going to erase 10 years by tomorrow. Like you said, we were talking about earlier, those just make better headlines. But I do know from working with folks that this idea of regulation and moderation, that people do have different set points for that. There are people who feel like they can savor one square of dark chocolate mindfully after a meal. And if they really pay attention and show up for it and treat themselves to some really high quality chocolate, that at the end of that minute, they're fully satisfied. And there are other people I know who feel like once that bar is open, like short of flushing it down the toilet, there's no way I'm not going to finish it. So, and I do think that there's some individual variation in our ability to kind of self-regulate and food reward. I don't think that means that we should give up. I think that there are other ways to build in some regulation so that we don't have to deny ourselves everything that we enjoy just because we're afraid we won't be able to control ourselves. I mean, there's just, sort of behavioral things that we can set in place, like not buying large quantities of foods that we feel like we're not going to have a whole lot of, like, for example, I don't keep breakfast cereal at home because I can kind of go a little nuts with breakfast cereal. Now, I'm not going to go nuts with oatmeal or steel cut oats or Greek
that doesn't do it for you.
Right. But, like a box of Honey Nut Cheerios in the cupboard, forget it. And not for breakfast. This would be like at 10 p.m. Oh my God. So, that's just something that I choose not to keep in my house. So I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So I think that even for people who feel like, I really do have a hard time enjoying just a little bit of something and then stopping, then my response is, well, then make sure that there's only a little bit available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or that if you've enjoyed it, then maybe you don't go right back out and restock it, like maybe a couple of weeks goes by and then maybe you might enjoy that treat again. So I do want to acknowledge, though, that some people really can just make up their mind and say, I'm just going to have one glass of wine and that's going to be it. And some people really struggle. Like they get to the bottom of that first glass. It's like, I really would have been better off not starting.
Yeah.
And to deny that reality, I think, is to, kind of deny their experience. But then the goal is to find ways to work with those, what we know about ourselves. One of the things that you do so beautifully in Body Kindness is talk about increasing our awareness of what's motivating us and how we're feeling, what's driving our choices. It gives us so much more power over that. So Gretchen may be one of those people who really, it's easier for her, to not have any of something than to have just a little bit. I think that's a fair choice for her to make for herself, but I hate for her to be implying that that's the only way it can be done.
Yeah, it's one thing to speak of yourself. Like I have found in my experience that I just prefer to, not have any of whatever because all my experience of having a little bit have been negative experiences. And it's your body, your choice, but this was definitely much more of, humans don't have the ability to moderate, that to me does not make sense. And I mean, you're absolutely right. Part of what makes us unique is that we all have unique lived experiences. And so there could be underlying reasons for why a particular food is difficult or challenging to at this moment enjoy in a calm, peaceful way that you expect other people do it, or, and to enjoy in moderation because emotions are bubbling up, that you may not even fully realize are there. So whether it's something from a childhood memory to something that you haven't let in your life for a really long time, or to just when I eat food and I enjoy it, I get this urge to continue to eat because, from past dieting, right? That like enjoyment in food kind of weren't allowed to happen because that meant overeating and doing something wrong. So it's there's, and I think that's the point, is that we definitely should not be saying you can't do moderation. Sugar's going to kill you, never have a brownie. Like who really is going to listen to that? And I think the people who really try actually have more difficulty in life. Now, that's not like you and I are sitting here saying, hey, we're nutrition experts. We want half your plate to be brownies every day, 3 times a day. Like, we wouldn't recommend that because we know you would feel like crap and we want you to meet your nutrition needs. But, this idea of that moderation doesn't necessarily promise. Well, I guess what it doesn't deliver actually, and as I'm thinking about it, is we do get that little mental, almost like a virtuous, I was strong because I avoided that thing. Moderation means that you're not getting that little reward of good job avoiding. So if we could turn good job into flexibility, then maybe we'd be somewhere.
Yes, I think, the more flexibility we have, because life is so much stuff comes up, and, and having flexibility and resilience in the face of when things don't go as planned or not the way we usually do them, I think that helps us kind of stay in the saddle rather than being thrown by every little unexpected thing. So yeah, I love that focus on flexibility. And also I know that that this is something that you value as well. And I do. When the conversation starts to go on too long about the need to avoid or limit or moderate, certain foods, I start to find myself thinking like, well, what do we want to promote instead? What is something that we can focus on increasing our enjoyment of, or incorporating more into our diets? Because I think that relentless focus on the things that we're trying to avoid or eliminate, that sort of, and do without, and is just unhealthy mental habits. That it's more fun, I think, if I'm trying to plan out my day and I really want to, have it be a day that supports my values, and part of that is, eating well. And not only do I want to like have in mind the things that I don't want to eat too much of, I also want to think about, I really want to make sure to get my 5 servings of vegetables today. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't it be nice to have fish? I haven't had that for a few days, and I think that there's some real mental benefits to shifting our perspective and reframing our goals, not just about those things that we don't want to do, but around those positive things that we do want to do.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love the word positive. If we can make food positive and self-care positive and connect these things with enjoyment and all this stuff, when we really think about enjoyment and how food would feel in our body, I mean, I know what I'd really enjoy: overeating so much I feel sick and stuffed to the gills, but yeah, we'd like to be able to go to a party and look at what looks good and just enjoy a little bit of this or a little bit of that. And, if we don't take the carrot sticks, it doesn't mean we don't like carrots,
Right.
But it's one time. If health is the very first thing you must think about all the time, I just question whether or not you really are relaxing and enjoying life and trusting your habits and your body, and that whole idea of that it eventually works itself out.
Yeah. I have a little tool that I've developed to use with people that I do coaching programs with called the Nutrition GPA. And it's a way of just kind of keeping a loose grasp on your habits without doing hardcore tracking and entering in foods and tracking calories. And, you and I have talked, I think in your interview on my podcast, we talked about trackers, diet trackers and fitness trackers and fitness crackers. Wouldn't that be a good idea?
Invent it. Come on. Go on Shark Tank.
And how, and how that can kind of become its own sort of obsession. Mm-hmm. So the Nutrition GPA is a way to just give sort of, to stay a little bit tuned in and give a little bit of accountability without going all the way down that road. And the reason I think of it is because it's based on every day you just answer 10 yes or no questions about what you ate that day. 5 of the questions have to do with things that we want to eat more often and more plentifully. And then 5 habits are ones that we want to make sure are not, kind of dominating our dietary choices. And so it's built right in is that balance between not only, what are the things that I want to make sure I'm not overdoing, but what are the things I really want to go out of my way to cultivate, to encourage, to seek out. And I think it builds in that kind of, that balance and that idea that eating healthy isn't just about denial and willpower, but that it also is about seeking out enjoyable ways to nourish our body, and because it's also not about just kind of choking down those 5 servings of vegetables. It's about, how can we make them even more delicious, or find more variety. But in this program that I do, the other thing that kind of ties into what we're talking about is that, so you answer your 10 questions, and in this coaching program that I do, which is a group program, basically any day that you could score 8 out of 10 of those, it's a darn good day. It's not about, making sure that you nail every 10, all 10 every day, because it's not realistic. And, that we do everything perfectly every day. And more importantly, it's not necessary. The habits that I picked, I kind of chose to be sort of broad so that among the 10 of them, they kind of touched on all the major things. And I feel like, if you're getting 8 out of 10 on any given day, that was a darn good attempt and or a darn good result. And so people are sometimes surprised when we start to do it. And I say, okay, so, your goal is just 8 out of 10. And they're like, really? Shouldn't it be 10? Wouldn't it be better if it were 10? I was like, well,
how do I exceed perfection, please?
There will be days when you do have 10s. There'll probably be also a couple of days when you have 6s. It's not the end of the world. That doesn't mean that you have to go back to day one, because your body doesn't go back to day one. We get up every morning with our entire history behind us. And don't you notice when people are tracking that there's this temptation to clear the slate if it just kind of feels like I need a fresh start.
I need to repent for what I did before and just...
Well, and I want to erase the evidence. I want to clear my history and start with a brand new, fresh, clean slate where everything will be perfect and there won't be any French fries. And, and I think, well, if that is going to... I know Gretchen talks about that, the clean slate, and how motivating that is for some people. And I remember when I read that chapter of her book, I was thinking, yeah, I get that, except here's the thing. Your body doesn't get a clean slate. Your life doesn't, for better or for worse, we are the result of every past choice that we've made, which is not to say we're doomed to failure, but I think it's a way of just kind of making peace with like, right, I did that. And now today I get new choices. And the other thing is I think that when we are tempted to push that button and say, all right, I screwed it up. I'm going to start again tomorrow on day one, and this time I'm going to get it perfect. Every time we do that, it makes it easier to do it again. And pretty soon, we're constantly starting over and kind of flushing, the stuff that we don't want to own in exchange for this sort of mythical future where we're going to be perfect. And I know that you and I both agree that that is such a setup for failure. And what it sets up is that it's this on again, off again thing. But people end up spending a lot more time off than on. So how about we just don't get on and off? How about we just stay on, wherever we are, and do as well as we can.
Yeah, no, that's it. I think what you're hitting on is the difference between guilt and shame too.
Excellent. Yes.
When we feel shame is when we want that clean slate. Like, I don't want to face what this mistake says about me as a person. In fact, we don't even see it as a mistake. It's a failure. You failed. You sucked. Shame, 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 shame spiral, as Brene Brown would say. Versus what you're saying is awareness and make peace. Like, okay, and maybe it's not even that I ate the fries. It's I said, screw it. And I ate fries really quickly and didn't really enjoy them. Like maybe that was the thing that disappointed you. So say what disappointed you. And then when you accept it, then you make room for it. And then you can be compassionate. Well, that's okay. This is a mistake. And I feel guilty about this mistake because I'm trying to be the kind of person who enjoys her fries when she eats them, right? So now we can feel guilt, but without feeling shame. And the guilt drives us to, this is what I want to do next time. And it's not, I'm bad, fries are bad, clean slate, da-da-da. And that is a much healthier way to work with yourself to improve your patterns, and
right. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. As I'm hearing you say that, I'm sort of realizing even more powerfully that when we attempt to erase, the past, whether it's flushing our history in our tracker, or, whatever, starting the diet again the next day, we're driving a wedge. We're distancing ourselves from ourselves, from our reality. We're kind of isolating ourselves into this unreality. And what does that say about, our ability to love ourselves, and accept ourselves. So we don't want to any more than you would distance yourself from a child or a pet who has made a mistake. You wouldn't try to erase them or deny their existence. There's a way for you to hold their mistake, and love them anyway and help them do better next time. And, would that we could bring that same level of kind of compassion and forgiveness to ourselves when we let ourselves down. But, that's what we're working on, right?
Yes. It's a lifelong practice, but it's good that that people have you in the coaching program. So, they can answer the questions, they could see how they're doing, but they also you can be the compassionate one for them if they're having difficulty with that. And then they can learn compassion through you. And I think that is very important for anyone who really is trying to change their habits. I mean, it's great to read an article and get some information. It's great to read a blog post, listen to a podcast, things like that, especially if it's coming from someone you trust. But it's like, there's nothing like that sort of interaction where someone can listen and understand exactly what's happening and then give a compassionate response when you yourself don't feel able to push that through. And that's how you actually build that. And I'm a huge fan of people, working in a collaborative setting, whether it's in groups or one-on-one, that you learn and grow in a different way because you have someone else that can help maybe see things a little bit different and maybe help provide a sense of care to your situation that's just too difficult for you.
It's so true. And that's another very touching thing for me about doing this in a group, is that I can see them also extending that compassion and understanding to each other. And that's almost even more powerful. And frequently, and in this particular group, the little program starts out with 30 days, but nobody ever leaves the group. So I have people who did it 2 years ago who are still active in the group. And we're getting ready to launch another group in a couple of weeks here. So we'll have some new people coming in. But people stay, in this group, and it's so meaningful to see them extending that to each other. And I think sometimes when a group member can watch somebody else kind of in that downward spiral of shame and self-punishment and step in and say, hey, is it really, that bad? Like, how could we, turn this around to something that's going to make tomorrow go further, that maybe it makes them even more able to do that for themselves. So, it's that multiplier effect. It's very powerful.
Yeah. And then back to the whole idea of moderation, and that, it's okay if there's variations in moderation. You're going to find what moderation looks like to you. But we are saying is that in the short term, it might feel like the extreme avoid it thing is easier, but it's only easy until you realize it's not workable, it's not doable for the rest of your life. And so it's about finding what you think a good form of moderation works for you. And it means going through a process of behavior change. And like you said, in your group setting, they get the support of each other as well as you. And that's where the juice really is. It's not just a short prescriptive set of rules. It really is in changing your mindset and then taking different actions and realizing that life can be much more free and beautiful and different and flexible as you figure out a way to cut out the noise that you hear and focus on what matters to me, what feels good to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's such a pleasure to talk about this with you, Rebecca, because you have such a refreshing and uplifting view of it. And I really just did love body kindness so much. And it's something that I've shared with the group because it just is so in sync with what we do there. And there was something that you said in our interview that not only stuck with me, but has kind of become a little buzzword in my community when I repeated it, when they heard you say it. I don't know if you remember saying this, but towards the end of the interview, you said, hey, you can't hate yourself healthy. I don't know whether that just kind of popped out of your mouth right then or whether that's a touch phrase that you repeat all the time, but it's very powerful. And I think people hear that and they think, oh, right.
Well, crap. How am I nice to myself then? I know it is. I can't even remember where it came from, but I had one of the most fierce inner critics in my life. And so that was kind of part of it, is just realizing no amount of vitriol that I could throw my way was ever going to get me the kind of life I really wanted. So I'm really, really glad that resonated. And your Nutrition GPA app and the coaching program, it all sounds really, really awesome. And I really loved our chat today. I wanted to leave with you letting people know, how can they find out more about your coaching and your work, and how can they best get in touch with you?
Oh, I'd love to hear from some of your folks. Probably the easiest way to find me is on the website at nutritionovereasy.com. That's also where the coaching program lives, so it's pretty easy to find. And you can email me through the site. And there's also links if you want, now that they're listening to your podcast, Rebecca, they might be interested in others. There's also links to the podcast and all that mess. But yeah, that's kind of mission control for all the stuff I'm doing. nutritionovereasy.com. And if you do get in touch with me, and because you heard this interview, make sure you let me know so that I can greet you as one of Rebecca's peeps.
Well, that sounds so wonderful. And thanks again for the conversation today. Body Kindness Classroom is coming. If you're ready for some radical collaboration, check out bodykindnessbook.com and check out Shop for more information. We're going to be having classes on body kindness calm and body kindness food. I'll see you in school.